Somewhere between the sunlit surface of the ocean and the permanent dark below, there is a layer that is neither. Not bright, not black, something in between. A slow blue diminishing that takes hundreds of meters to complete. Light enters this place, but it arrives changed, weakened, unsure of itself. And yet this layer is vast, and it is full of life, and almost no one has ever thought about it. Hello there, and welcome to Deep Sea Slumber. Tonight we descend, slowly and without hurry, into the ocean's twilight zone. That great middle layer where daylight loosens its hold, and the world becomes something quieter, stranger, and more patient than the one above. There is a name for this place. Scientists call it the mesopelagic zone, from the Greek for middle and open sea. It begins roughly 200 meters below the surface, where the last reliable light is thinning, and it ends somewhere around 1,000 meters down, where even that faint remainder gives out entirely. Between those two depths lies a column of water wider than most continents are tall. A world suspended between the familiar and the unknown. A place where the sun still reaches, but only just. Only as a kind of memory of itself, a blue suggestion dissolving into nothing. What makes this layer remarkable is not that it is dark. It is that it is almost not dark. There is still light here, enough to perceive. Not enough to live by, not if you are a plant, not if you need the sun to grow. And so the twilight zone exists in a condition that is difficult to name. Illuminated but not nourishing. Visible but barely. Present but always fading. Life here has had to learn to exist in the unresolved. In the long, slow gradient between day and night that the ocean takes hundreds of meters to complete. We tend to think of the ocean in layers. The bright surface we can see from boats and beaches. The crushing blackness of the deep trenches we imagine at the bottom. But between those two familiar ideas, there is this, a third thing, enormous and inhabited, and almost entirely invisible to us. More water exists in the twilight zone than in all the world's rivers, lakes, and shallow seas combined. And it moves, and it breathes, and it participates in the life of this planet in ways we are only beginning to understand. Tonight, we are going there. Not to the surface, not to the abyss, to the in-between. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. Before we go any further, let your body begin to settle. If your shoulders have been carrying anything, the weight of the day, the small tensions that accumulate without announcement, let them soften now, not dramatically. Just a small release, the kind that happens when you stop holding something you forgot you were holding. Let your breath find its own pace. You do not need to control it. You do not need to slow it deliberately. Only notice it, the way it moves, the way it returns, the quiet rhythm of it. That rhythm is already there. It does not need your help. And if you are lying down, feel the surface beneath you receiving your weight. This is what water does in its way. It holds things. It suspends them. It allows them to drift rather than fall. Tonight, as we descend into the twilight zone together, you might imagine that same quality of suspension. Not sinking, not floating, simply held in the middle of something vast and calm. The ocean does not rush its transitions. That is one of the things worth knowing before we begin. At the surface, there is light. 1,000 meters below, there is none. But the ocean does not switch between those two states. It moves through them, gradually, the way afternoon becomes evening. Not at a single moment, but across a long, unhurried passage of time and depth. The Twilight Zone is that passage. It is the ocean's dusk, stretched across hundreds of meters of cold and pressure and slow blue dimming. There is something quietly comforting about a place defined by gradual change. We understand, at some level, the comfort of transition, of the moment when the light softens and the day begins to let go. The Twilight Zone is that moment, held still, extended, turned into an entire world. Tonight, we are going to spend time in it. We will learn what happens to light as it descends. We will learn who lives in this middle layer and how they manage the difficult business of existing, where food is scarce and visibility is uncertain, and the pressure of the water above is already beginning to be felt. We will learn about migrations that happen every day, vast and unseen, as animals rise toward the surface at night and descend again before dawn. We will learn about the role this layer plays in the health of the planet, a role so quiet and so large that it is easy to overlook, like many of the most important things. But all of that comes gently and slowly and without any urgency. For now, only this. Somewhere below the sunlit sea, the light is thinning. The water is cooling. The world is becoming something other than what we know from the surface. And it is full of life, patient and adapted and quietly extraordinary. Let's begin. As the surface brightness fades above us, the water itself begins to decide what light may keep going. Sunlight does not end all at once. It is sorted. Each color in daylight is a different wavelength, and seawater does not treat them equally. Some are taken quickly, almost at once, while others travel farther down through the shifting water column, lingering in a thinner and thinner form until they become less like illumination and more like a memory of illumination. That is the first rule of this place. Light is not only dimmer here, it is edited. Red disappears first. That sounds small until you follow what it means. Red light has a longer wavelength, and seawater absorbs it readily, turning it into heat before it can travel very far beneath the surface. A red object may still be red in itself, but without red light to strike it and return to the eye, that redness has nowhere to appear. It becomes dark instead. So, a color can still exist, and yet vanish. There is something quietly profound in that. What we see is never only the thing itself. It is also the meeting between a thing and the conditions around it, which means the Twilight Zone is full of bodies and surfaces that are one thing in daylight and another in the dim, selective blue beneath. A fish may carry crimson skin into the mesopelagic and wear, in effect, black. That is why many Twilight Zone animals are red. Near the surface, red can be bold. In these depths, it is a disguise. With almost no red wavelengths left in the water, red tissues reflect almost nothing back to watching eyes, which makes them appear dusky, shadowed, and difficult to detect against the dark. A color we associate with visibility becomes a form of hiding. Camouflage here begins with physics, and yet the water is not simply taking color away at random. Orange fades early too. Yellow weakens. Green survives longer, though not as long as blue. Each step downward removes another portion of the spectrum, as if the ocean was slowly pulling threads from daylight until only the most persistent strands remain. The result is not the blackness of midnight. Not yet. It is a world reduced to fewer notes. Blue travels deepest. Part of that is because shorter wavelengths in the blue range pass through clear seawater more effectively than reds and oranges do. Water molecules, and the things suspended among them absorb and scatter light according to wavelength, and the balance happens to favor blue enough that it can reach well into the mesopelagic before thinning into near nothing. That is why the open ocean often looks blue from above, and why the deeper middle waters keep that color long after other tones are gone. Blue is what remains when much else has been filtered out. It is the last broad language of the sun. What makes this strange is that blue does not remain strong. It persists, but in a changed condition. By the time sunlight reaches the middle depths, it is faint, diffuse, and coming mostly from above, with little of the full, balanced brightness familiar at the surface. The day has been pared down until it is no longer a day any surface animal would recognize. Yet it is still enough to matter. For an animal living here, that weak overhead glow can define the entire logic of the body. Eyes may angle upward. Silhouettes matter more than color patterns. Transparency, reflectivity, and carefully placed light organs can all become useful because the remaining sunlight still creates contrast. Even a dim ceiling of blue is enough to reveal a shape crossing beneath it. So the mesopelagic is not a place after light. It is a place governed by light's last terms. There is no true sunrise down here in the way we know it, and no bright noon spreading across the seafloor. Instead, there is a persistent, filtered radiance, reduced almost to abstraction, which still manages to sort exposure from concealment, safety from risk, and feeding from being fed upon. A world can be organized by a whisper as fully as by a command. Here the whisper is blue, and that changes time itself. At the surface, light arrives as an event. Dawn breaks, morning brightens, clouds pass, reflections dance. In the twilight zone, the cycle is softened into a gradual change in dimness, almost more sensed than seen. Day and night still pass through, but they do so as subtle shifts in the intensity of the water above, rather than as obvious scenes. The clock remains, though it speaks more quietly. Life learns to hear quiet clocks. This is one reason the twilight zone can feel so difficult to imagine from land. Our own experience of light is dramatic. Rooms brighten, shadows sharpen, colors announce themselves. But in the mesopelagic, sunlight survives in a diminished state, stripped of warmth and much of its spectrum, arriving not as spectacle, but as condition. It is less like standing in a day than living inside the afterimage of one. A whole ecosystem lives in permanent almost day. That phrase sounds poetic until you realize it is also practical. Organisms here are exposed to enough ambient light that they cannot behave as if darkness protects them completely. Yet they do not receive enough light to rely on ordinary surface vision either. They live in a compromise. Their eyes, skins, shapes, and movements belong to a world where visibility is partial and uncertain. In other words, almost day is its own environment. The water itself helps make this happen through two linked processes: absorption and scattering. Absorption removes light energy, converting it into other forms, mostly heat. Scattering redirects light from its original path as it hits water molecules and suspended particles, sending some of it off at new angles. Together, these processes thin the beam, soften its direction, and leave the deep water filled with a weak, diffuse glow rather than clear shafts of intact sunlight. Light does not merely fade here, it frays. That fraying matters because it changes not only brightness, but information. Near the surface, sunlight can describe surfaces clearly, showing edges, textures and color differences. Lower down, the reduced and scattered blue light tells a simpler story. It can reveal that something is there, above or below, but often not much more. Details are surrendered before light is surrendered entirely. The world becomes legible in fewer strokes. There is a kind of tenderness in that reduction. Complexity does not vanish, but it becomes hidden inside simpler signals. A body may be richly structured, delicately colored, intricately shaped, and still appear as only a dim suggestion from a short distance away. The Twilight Zone reminds us that reality and appearance can separate gently, not only dramatically. Much can be present without declaring itself. Suspended particles add their own quiet influence. The open ocean can seem empty to us, but seawater is never only water. It contains bits of organic matter, tiny organisms, minerals, and drifting fragments, all of which can scatter light and alter how far it travels. In clearer tropical water, sunlight can penetrate deeper. In more productive or particle-rich regions, the fading happens sooner, so even the depth of twilight shifts from place to place. There is no single border where day becomes this dim world. That too is worth noticing. Ocean layers sound precise when we name them, but nature often prefers gradients. The mesopelagic is usually described as stretching from about 200 to 1,000 meters. Yet the exact feel of that range depends on latitude, season, weather, surface productivity, and the angle of the sun itself. Boundaries exist, but they blur. The ocean keeps drawing its lines with a soft hand. At noon in clear water, some sunlight can penetrate surprisingly far. At dawn, dusk, or under heavy cloud, the same depths may darken sooner. In polar regions, low sun angles shape the light differently from the vertical blaze of the tropics. So the Twilight Zone is not a fixed chamber beneath the sea. It is a moving agreement between sunlight and water. An agreement and a fragile one. What makes this more remarkable is that animals have evolved within that changing agreement. They are not adapted to one rigid amount of light, but to a range of dim conditions that still obey the same overall logic. Blue lasts, brightness weakens, upward silhouettes matter, and the sun is present mostly as distant overhead residue. Their bodies do not need certainty. They need consistency of pattern. Life is often built on patterns, not absolutes. Even the familiar idea that sunlight brings warmth becomes less useful here. The light reaching the mesopelagic is too weak to provide much heat, and the water grows steadily colder with depth. So the sun remains visually important, long after its warming influence has mostly fallen away. Illumination and comfort separate. The light still rules, but at a distance. It becomes authority without touch. That is a strange condition to live under, to be shaped every day by something you barely feel, to organize your body around a glow that no longer warms you, only reveals you. The mesopelagic is full of creatures living under the last jurisdiction of the sun, where daylight still decides things, but only faintly. It is the reach, not the embrace. Some wavelengths disappear so quickly that they create opportunities surface life rarely notices. Red bioluminescence, for example, can function almost like a private lantern for the few animals able to produce it and detect it, because most nearby creatures cannot see red well in a place where red sunlight no longer exists. We will come to living light later, but the principle begins here with absence. What the water removes can become a hidden channel. A missing color can create secrecy, and blue, because it remains, becomes crowded with meaning. Many eyes in this zone are especially sensitive to blue wavelengths. Many bioluminescent signals are blue or blue-green. Many camouflage strategies are tuned against the faint blue downwelling light from above. Once the water has reduced the spectrum, evolution can concentrate its efforts on what is left. Constraint becomes design. This happens again and again in nature. Limits do not only restrict life, they shape it, sometimes with great precision. The Twilight Zone is not merely a dimmer version of the surface ocean. It is a place where the filtering of light has gone far enough to reorganize seeing itself, and with it feeding, hiding, migration, courtship, and the quiet negotiations of survival. One physical rule ramifies into a whole way of being. That is the wonder of a gradient. Not a wall, not a sudden plunge into dark. A gradient, a long surrender of color, direction, and strength, patient enough that life can move with it and make a home inside the fading. The mesopelagic exists because sunlight does not simply stop. It weakens in steps, and each step leaves room for another adaptation, another body plan, another delicate answer to the question of how to live beneath a sun you can barely keep. The almost is what made the world. If there were full daylight here, the community would be different. If there were total darkness, it would be different again. But the Twilight Zone belongs to neither condition. It is built by leftovers, by partial transmission, by the last wavelengths still slipping downward through miles of water. Sometimes an ecosystem forms not where a force is strongest, but where it is almost gone. And almost gone can still be enough. There is something comforting in that, perhaps because it feels wider than the ocean. Much of life happens under weakened signals. We live by remnants, by traces, by things that reach us softened by distance and time. The mesopelagic takes that quiet truth and makes a whole realm from it. Here, the failing of light is not the end of meaning. It is the beginning of another kind. By the time the blue has thinned further, bodies must rely on more than the sun's last reach. The water grows colder still. The pressure continues its patient rise. And what remains of brightness has to share the dark with signals made by life itself. Little lanterns answering the failure of day with their own careful glow. So the dim ceiling stays above, and beneath it the living begin to shine. And once light has weakened, the other forces of the ocean begin to speak more clearly. The water is colder here. Not dramatically colder in the way a surface swimmer might feel a sudden current, but steadily, almost permanently colder. In much of the Twilight Zone, temperatures settle into a narrow chill, often only a few degrees above freezing, and remain there with a patience the upper ocean rarely keeps. Weather loses its reach. Day and night lose much of their authority. The water becomes reliable. That reliability changes everything. Near the surface, animals live in a world that shifts. Sun warms it. Wind stirs it. Seasons lean into it. But deeper down, the Twilight Zone offers a different bargain, where temperature varies less, motion slows, and the body can be built for constancy rather than surprise. Cold is not only a condition here, it is an architectural rule. Cold slows chemistry. Muscles contract more slowly. Nerves can send signals more slowly. Digestion often takes longer, and growth may stretch across years with little outward sign. Yet this is not simply a story of limitation. Lower temperatures also reduce metabolic demand, which means a body can survive on less energy, spend less, and wait longer between opportunities in a world where food may be scattered and rare. Slowness becomes practical. That is why so many Twilight Zone lives seem measured rather than hurried. A cold, stable habitat rewards designs that do not waste. Soft tissues can be enough. Thin muscles can be enough. A body does not need to be ready for every sudden burst if most of life is spent hovering, drifting, or making careful vertical journeys through dim water. In other words, the environment is not asking for maximum performance. It is asking for efficiency that can last. Pressure rises with a quiet certainty. For every 10 meters or about 33 feet of descent, the ocean adds roughly 1 atmosphere of pressure. By 200 meters, the water presses with about 20 times the pressure at the surface. By 1,000 meters, near the lower reaches of the Twilight Zone, it may be around 100 atmospheres. Nothing in seawater announces this. It simply accumulates. The deeper world is built from addition. No single meter changes everything. No fish crosses one invisible line and suddenly enters another universe. Yet the weight keeps gathering above, layer upon layer, until ordinary water becomes a force capable of crushing air spaces, compressing gases, and reshaping what kinds of bodies can comfortably exist. Depth is gradual. Its consequences are not. What makes this strange is how simple the cause is. There is no special deep-sea substance waiting below. It is the same ocean, the same seawater becoming heavier by remaining overhead. A radically different world emerges not from new material, but from more of the familiar. That has a quiet grandeur to it. Enough repetition can become transformation. Air-filled spaces become a problem. At the surface, gas can be useful. Lungs, swim bladders, sinuses, and other pockets of air can help with buoyancy, hearing, or balance. But gas is compressible. As pressure rises, those spaces shrink unless the animal spends energy adjusting them. And the deeper it goes, the more troublesome that becomes. A design that works well above can become costly below. That is why many Twilight Zone animals reduce or abandon gas altogether. Some fishes in this layer have small swim bladders or unusual ones, and some rely less on them than shallower relatives do. Others use oils, watery tissues, gelatinous layers, or reduced mineralization in bones to approach neutral buoyancy without depending on compressible gas. Squid and many drifting animals solve the problem differently again, but the principle is shared. A body that avoids being crushed avoids a daily negotiation with pressure. Buoyancy here is not convenience. It is survival economics. If an animal can hover without constant swimming, it saves precious energy in a place where every calorie matters. To be slightly lighter, slightly softer, slightly less dense than expected can mean spending less all day and all night. The body becomes a balance sheet written in tissue. Even shape begins to express restraint. Some Twilight Zone bodies look unfinished to surface eyes. They can appear delicate, loose, almost provisional, as though the animal were only partly assembled. Flesh may be soft, skeletons may be lightly built, muscles may seem modest. Yet this is not poor engineering. It is engineering so precise that it leaves out everything unnecessary. Strength costs. Dense bone costs minerals. Thick muscle costs energy to maintain. Fast swimming costs oxygen and food. In the upper ocean, where light supports richer food webs and rapid pursuit may be rewarded, those costs can pay back quickly. In the Twilight Zone, they often do not. And so many animals are built not to overpower their environment, but to agree with it. That agreement has a certain elegance. A loosely built fish in deep, dim water is not failing to be robust. It is refusing to carry what the habitat will not pay for. Evolution trims and trims again until the animal becomes less like a machine made for force and more like a patient answer to pressure, cold, and scarcity. It settles into the physics around it. Water itself helps hold them up. Because seawater is dense, an animal does not need the same kind of structural support that life on land requires. It can suspend mass with less effort. This allows for forms that would collapse under their own weight in air, from gelatinous drifters to fishes with weakly ossified bones and broad, thin tissues. The ocean permits softness, and yet softness is not the same as fragility. In these depths, softness can be a strategy of resilience. Flexible tissues may tolerate pressure better than rigid, gas-filled structures. A body that yields can avoid breaking. A body that weighs little in relation to the water around it can persist with astonishing thrift. The absence of hardness begins to look less like vulnerability and more like fit. The vertical scale is easy to underestimate. The Twilight Zone is often described as a layer, but it is really an immense band, stretching roughly from 200 to 1,000 meters deep across most of the global ocean. That means a habitat hundreds of meters thick, draped around the planet beneath the brighter sea. It is less like a corridor than a continent turned upright. Its dimensions are strange to the surface mind. An animal here does not simply live at depth. It lives somewhere within a vertical landscape where conditions can change significantly from top to bottom. Pressure increases. Light fades further. Temperatures may shift around local water masses. Food arriving from above becomes more diffuse. To occupy this realm is often to specialize not just for one place, but for one part of a deep gradient. That is why position matters so much. A few hundred meters upward or downward can alter what can be seen, what can be hunted, what predators are near, and how much energy must be spent to remain there. For some species, life becomes a question of exact altitude in water, not left or right, up or down. The ocean turns height into fate. Many animals meet this challenge with bodies tuned for suspension. Large livers rich in lipids can help with buoyancy in some fishes. Ammonium ions, lighter than seawater, can contribute in certain squids and deep species. Gelatinous tissues add volume without adding much weight. Reduced ossification lowers density. None of these solutions is dramatic on its own, but together they reveal a world where floating well may matter more than moving fast. To hover is to spend less. That simple fact may shape more anatomy here than any single predatory contest. If the day is long, the water cold, and food uncertain, then a body that can remain poised in the water column with minimal effort has solved one of the deepest problems of the habitat. Existence becomes affordable. Life continues by reducing the cost of being there. Pressure also reaches into chemistry. Proteins, membranes, and enzymes do not behave identically under high pressure and low temperature. At the cellular level, the machinery of life must keep working while water presses inward from all sides and the cold slows molecular motion. Some deep living animals adjust the composition of cell membranes so they remain flexible. Others accumulate compounds that help stabilize proteins under pressure. The strangeness is microscopic too. Even a cell must become a deep-sea resident. This is part of what makes the Twilight Zone so absorbing to think about. Adaptation is not only visible in jaws, fins, and eyes. It descends into the hidden grammar of tissues, where each membrane must remain supple and each protein must still fold and function in a difficult physical world. The environment writes itself into life at every scale. Not all creatures solve these problems in the same way. Crustaceans, fishes, cephalopods, jelly-like drifters, and siphonophores each inherit different possibilities from their ancestry. Evolution does not start from nothing. It begins with what a lineage already is, then bends that inheritance toward the demands of the habitat. That is why the Twilight Zone contains many solutions to the same few problems. Stay afloat, endure pressure, save energy, find food. Life keeps recomposing the same quiet equations. One lineage makes oils, another reduces bone, another becomes nearly transparent and mostly water. Another keeps enough muscle for sudden motion, then returns to stillness. The variety is real, but so is the repeated logic beneath it. Many forms, one set of conditions. The ocean asks the question, and evolution answers in several dialects. There are limits to who can visit. Animals adapted to surface conditions can sometimes descend, but not all can remain. Gas spaces become difficult. Metabolic demands may no longer match available food. Tissues built for warmer, brighter, more changeable water may not perform well in the stable cold below. The Twilight Zone is open water, but it is not equally open to all bodies. This is what depth does. It acts as a filter without walls. There is no gate, no reef, no mountain, no obvious border. Yet the increasing weight of water and the steady chill sort living things with great firmness. A habitat can be selective without being visible. It can exclude simply by being itself. And still, many creatures pass through it every day. Some are residents, shaped for this dim middle realm. Others commute through it, enduring changing pressure as they rise and sink on daily migrations. Their bodies must tolerate more than one world at once, or at least the passage between them. The Twilight Zone is not only a place to live, it is a place to cross, and crossing changes what kinds of animals can exist at all. A body here often reflects compromise. It may need enough buoyancy for long suspensions, enough muscle for brief escapes, enough tolerance for pressure shifts, and low enough energy demands to survive lean intervals. No single trait explains the whole form. Instead, the animal becomes an arrangement of trade-offs, each one made under the quiet authority of seawater. The design is rarely extravagant. It is careful. What looks plain may be highly refined. A small fish with watery flesh and a weak skeleton may carry within it millions of years of adjustment to cold, darkness, and compression. And a transparent, drifting animal may seem almost absent, yet that near absence may be exactly what allows it to persist in a habitat where mass is expensive and concealment matters. The deep often hides sophistication inside simplicity. There is also something humbling in how little force is needed to create this world. No volcanic heat is required, no toxic chemistry, no rare mineral, just depth, just the accumulation of water overhead, the fading of warmth, the thinning of available energy, and enough time for life to answer. The ocean does not need drama to become alien. It only needs distance beneath the surface. That may be one of the deepest wonders here. The Twilight Zone is not far away in the planetary sense. It begins within reach of continental shelves, beneath storms, shipping lanes, fisheries, coastlines, and ordinary days. Yet, by the time one has entered its cold pressure and vertical immensity, the rules have shifted so completely that familiar ideas about movement, structure, and even effort begin to feel local rather than universal. Our version of a body is only one version. Down here, the water chooses differently. It favors patience over speed, suspension over constant propulsion, tissues that yield over spaces filled with air, and economies so fine that whole lives can be balanced on tiny savings. The result is not a lesser world than the bright sea above. It is another one, built from the same substance and arranged by deeper terms. And because those terms are so steady, the whole layer feels strangely composed. Cold remains cold. Pressure remains pressure. The vertical reaches continue upward and downward beyond any individual life. Animals enter that order and fit themselves to it as best they can. Some drift, some hover, some rise and fall through it like thoughts passing through sleep. The water holds them all, and after a while, even the difficulty of this place begins to seem quiet. Not easy, not gentle in the human sense, but settled. The cold does not argue, the pressure does not hurry. They simply remain, and life, over long ages, has learned to remain with them. That is one way a world is made. Slowly, by conditions that do not change their mind. In a place where the environment changes by the meter, survival often means moving with the light itself. As evening settles over the sea, the twilight zone begins to loosen. The faint brightness above weakens, and with that small change, an enormous movement starts. Animals that spent the day in deeper, dimmer water begin to rise, slowly and steadily, toward the surface layers where food is more abundant. It happens so regularly that it can feel less like behavior than like breathing. This daily ascent and descent is called diel vertical migration. Diel simply means over a 24-hour. In a place where the environment changes by the meter, survival often means moving with the light itself. As evening settles over the sea, the twilight zone begins to loosen. The faint brightness above weakens, and with that small change, an enormous movement starts. Animals that spent the day in deeper, dimmer water begin to rise, slowly and steadily, toward the surface layers where food is more abundant. It happens so regularly that it can feel less like behavior than like breathing. This daily ascent and descent is called diel vertical migration. Diel simply means over a 24-hour cycle, arranged by day and night. Vertical tells the rest of the story, because the path is not across the sea, but up through it and then back down again, as if the ocean contains a hidden commute with no roads and no sound. It is one of the largest synchronized movements of life on Earth. That scale is easy to miss because so much of it happens out of sight. There is no coastline full of watchers, no dust lifted by hooves, no sky darkened by wings. Instead, there are lanternfish, shrimps, siphonophores, squids, copepods, krill, jellyforms, and many others, each small in itself, joining a vast upward drift that begins in the dim water and climbs toward night. The planet changes shape with them. During the day, many of these animals remain deeper than they would choose if food were the only question. The darker water offers shelter from eyes above and around them. Predators that hunt by sight have a harder time finding a body held beneath a thicker layer of dimness, and so the cost of distance is accepted in exchange for the safety of shadow. Hunger waits below the risk, yet hunger does not stop. Nearer the surface, microscopic plants have gathered sunlight and turned it into living matter. Small grazers feed there, and slightly larger hunters feed on them, and the whole upper ocean becomes by comparison, a place of relative plenty. That is why so many Twilight Zone animals rise after sunset, entering water that would be too dangerous in daylight but becomes tolerable under darkness. Night opens the pantry. A lanternfish offers a quiet example. By day, it may remain hundreds of meters down, suspended in cold blue dimness with thousands of others. As the light above fades, it begins to climb, not with haste, but with a patient pulse of muscle and fin, making its way toward water richer in plankton, where each mouthful matters because so many of its hours are spent conserving. The distance is long, but so is the need. Some species travel only part of the way. Others move several hundred meters in a single night, and a few may shift even more, depending on age, season, region, and the presence of predators. The ocean is not asking for one answer. It is offering a gradient, and each animal has found a depth range that balances appetite against exposure, energy against danger, in a negotiation renewed every evening. The route is different, but the logic is shared. What makes this migration so remarkable is that it is not led by a single species. It is a layered response by entire communities. Tiny crustaceans rise, and fish rise to meet them. Squid follow those fish. Gelatinous drifters move with their own slow certainty, while predators that have learned the timing of the ascent take up position along the route, as if the water itself has rush hour. It is a food web in motion. Scientists can hear some of this movement before they ever see it. When ships send sound into the water, they often detect a deep scattering layer, a broad band of echoes produced by many small bodies together. By day, that acoustic layer sits deeper. At dusk, it lifts. At dawn, it sinks again, and the instruments trace a living sheet moving through the sea as predictably as the rising and setting of the sun above it. The ocean keeps time internally. For a while, this scattering layer puzzled researchers enough that some early sonar operators mistook it for the seafloor. That misunderstanding has its own quiet beauty. A place we thought was solid turned out to be life. Countless delicate animals packed densely enough to resemble ground on a screen. In other words, abundance can become so vast that it briefly pretends to be geology. The rise itself is not always smooth. Some animals pause at certain depths, waiting for the last usable light to fade. Others follow what is called an isolium, a band of equal brightness, adjusting their position to remain within a preferred level of dimness. They are not simply going up or down. They are reading the water with exquisite care, matching themselves to a moving threshold that only exists because sunlight is disappearing overhead. They live by shades. That means the migration is shaped not just by the clock, but by weather, season, and the moon. On bright moonlit nights, some species may stay deeper than they would under cloud cover or a new moon. Even that faint silver illumination can alter the balance between feeding opportunity and being seen. What looks gentle from above can be sharp below, because in the Twilight Zone, a little extra light is not a detail. It is an event. There is patience in this. An animal may be hungry, and still it waits lower until the water above becomes just dark enough. Another may rise only part way, feeding on whatever passes rather than risking the shallows. A third may make a longer climb because its body, eyes, pigments, and behavior have all been tuned by evolution for that nightly gamble. Need is common, but courage is calibrated. Young animals often move differently from adults. Smaller bodies can face different predators, different swimming costs, and different feeding opportunities. Some juveniles remain shallower, others stay deeper. Even within one species, migration can become a pattern of stages, as if growing up in the Twilight Zone means learning not only how to eat and avoid being eaten, but also how far to trust the dark. Life history becomes geography. Predators learn these rhythms as well. A hatchetfish may angle upward in the evening to intercept smaller prey on their way to the surface. Squid patrol the ascent lanes with large eyes tuned to dim contrasts. Higher still, fish, seabirds, and marine mammals may take advantage of the nighttime crowding near the upper layers, feeding on animals that have come up under cover of darkness and become, for a few hours, accessible. Night redistributes the menu. And yet, the migration is not a simple parade toward danger. It is also a release. Day depth can be a place of restraint, where many animals hover with slow metabolisms and limited movement, waiting out the bright hours in comparative stillness. The night ascent allows feeding, mating encounters, and contact with a wider spread of drifting food, so the upward journey is not only about risk, but about permission. Darkness gives room. Some creatures reverse the pattern. A few predators remain deeper at night and rise less because their prey comes down to them, or because their own strategies depend on ambush from below. The broad rhythm remains, but exceptions matter. They remind us that even one of the planet's largest daily migrations is not a military formation. It is a field of individual decisions, each body adjusting within inherited limits to changing light, changing hunger, and changing threat. Order here is made of choices. The energy cost of all this movement is not trivial. Swimming vertically through dense water, sometimes over hundreds of meters, asks much from a small body. That is why timing matters so much. If the feeding gained near the surface does not repay the cost of travel and the risk of exposure, the journey fails. The migration persists because, over immense spans of time, enough journeys have been worth making. Motion must earn itself. What it means is larger than feeding. When billions upon billions of animals rise at night and sink by day, they do not only move themselves, they move the consequences of eating. Material consumed nearer the surface is carried downward inside bodies, released through waste, respiration, spawning, and death at deeper levels. A nightly search for food becomes, in aggregate, part of how the ocean redistributes matter through its middle depths. Appetite shapes chemistry, but before it becomes global process, it is still a scene in dim water. A copepod, almost dust-like in size, beating its appendages as it rises into richer layers. A lanternfish with a silvered side and dark back, holding the angle of its climb. A squid appearing from below, then vanishing upward into water only slightly less dark. Around them, millions of other bodies are making similar calculations without language, each one reading the oldest signal in the sea. Less light now. It is time. Imagine being in that water at dusk, suspended where blue is becoming black, and sensing the whole column above and below beginning to rearrange. Not chaos, not panic, more like a quiet agreement carried out at vast scale. The upper layers grow available. The deep releases its waiting forms. The migration begins again as it did last night and the night before, an ancient rhythm faithful not to place, but to change itself. The cue is disappearance. The descent at dawn has a different feeling. Stomachs are fuller. The window has closed. As the first strengthening light filters downward, the animals turn and begin to sink or swim back into deeper dimness, returning to the depths that make daylight survivable. It is less like retreat than return, a settling back into the narrow conditions that protect them through another day. Safety, once again, lies below. This return can be swift for some and gradual for others. A cloud passing overhead may briefly delay it. A predator nearby may hurry it. Seasonal changes in day length shift the timing over the year, and regional waters produce their own variations. But the broad pattern persists with extraordinary steadiness. Sunrise presses downward through the ocean, and life answers by lowering itself out of reach. The sea closes softly behind them. If you could compress these movements into a single visible image, the ocean would seem to pulse. Not at the surface where waves show themselves, but in the hidden interior where bodies rise and fall in repeating bands. Every evening, the middle water swells upward with life. Every morning, it relaxes downward again. The earth contains tides of flesh as well as tides of water. That idea changes the way the Twilight Zone feels. It is not merely a place where creatures happen to live between sunlit seas and the deep abyss. It is a transit layer, a shifting avenue through which immense numbers pass each day, carrying energy upward and downward, linking worlds that otherwise seem separate. The middle is not empty space between destinations. The middle is the movement itself. And there is something quietly moving about the fact that so much of this happens without witness. The migration has likely been underway for tens of millions of years in some form, repeated through warm periods and cold ones, through extinctions, shifting currents, and rearranged coastlines. Long before ships sent sound downward, long before anyone gave it a name, the Twilight Zone was already keeping this schedule. Life does not need to be seen to become immense. By the time daylight has fully returned, the upper layers may seem calmer again. The great rising has dissolved from view. The animals are lower now, scattered through dim water where shadow protects them, and hunger begins once more to lengthen toward evening. Nothing announces the end of the commute. It simply settles back into depth, patient and hidden, waiting for the light to fail enough to make the journey possible again. So the Twilight Zone is never still in the way it first appears. Its calm is real, but it is a calm made of timing, restraint, and return. Beneath the surface, every day contains an ascent, and every dawn asks for descent. Countless small bodies answer together, making a rhythm so large it brushes against the scale of weather, yet so quiet that the sea keeps it mostly to itself. And perhaps that is part of the wonder. One of the world's greatest migrations does not thunder across land or streak across the sky. It drifts through dark water, rising with hunger and sinking with caution, faithful to a fading light that reaches down and then lets go. By morning, the movement is hidden again. The pattern remains. To live in dimness is not only to endure it, but to become quietly shaped by what little light remains. In the Twilight Zone, being seen can mean being followed, and being followed can mean being eaten. That is why so many bodies here seem to have been designed by water itself, trimmed and polished until they interfere with light as little as possible. In this layer, survival often depends on becoming difficult to notice at all. A fish hanging beneath the fading blue is never alone with darkness. Above it, far overhead, there is still a weak wash of downwelling light, enough to turn a solid body into a silhouette. Any hunter looking upward can use that pale ceiling as a screen. What makes this world strange is that even a small shadow can be a confession. A body says, "Here I am." That is why some animals answer light with light. Along the bellies of certain fishes and squids, rows of tiny organs glow with a blue or blue-green radiance that can be adjusted in brightness. Seen from below, those lamps soften the dark outline of the animal against the dim water overhead. The creature does not shine for display here so much as for erasure. This is called counter-illumination, though the word is neater than the act itself. The animal must match the light above closely enough that its own body fades into the background, as if a missing piece of brightness has been carefully replaced. Yet this is not magic and not a trick in the simple sense. It is measurement, response, and control performed in cold water by a living body that has learned how to disappear. A lanternfish can drift in that thin blue gloom, with photophores scattered along its underside like a patient constellation. Nerves and hormones help tune the glow. Some species even carry filters or shutters made of tissue, changing the quality or intensity of the light they release. In other words, invisibility here is active work, a quiet negotiation between body and background. The scene is easy to picture if you hold it gently. A small fish rises into feeding water after dark, then hesitates as dawn begins to gather somewhere far above. Its belly lights come on in a measured line. Not bright, just enough. What makes this especially beautiful is the precision involved. Too little light, and the body remains a detectable shape. Too much, and the animal becomes its own signal, visible for the opposite reason. So the safest body in the Twilight Zone is often one that keeps adjusting, again and again, to a sky made of water. Some squid do something similar with remarkable delicacy. Their photophores can sit beneath lenses or reflectors, arranged almost like tiny lamps built into living skin. The effect from below is not a glowing animal, but the absence of one, a place where the eye expects a shadow and fails to find it. That failure matters. A predator misses a meal because the outline never quite forms. Even at this scale, the logic is familiar. We know what it is to lower a voice in a quiet room, or to wear muted colors in fog, or to pause before stepping into notice. The Twilight Zone has its own version of that instinct, refined over immense time into tissues that answer the oldest problem in nature. How do you remain present in the world without being announced to it? Light is only one part of the vanishing act. Shape matters too. Many mesopelagic fishes are narrow from the side and pale along the belly, reducing the surface that can cast a visible edge. Some are almost blade-like, their bodies compressed into forms that seem less built for strength than for minimizing interruption. Yet what looks delicate is often exact. The body has become a solution to being glanced past. Other animals choose a different answer and borrow the color of the water itself. Transparency is common among small drifting creatures and larval forms, but even larger twilight animals may keep muscles, tissues, or outer coverings unusually clear. A glass squid, for instance, can leave the eye searching for a boundary and finding only a pair of dark eyes suspended in almost nothing. The animal is there, but not in the way vision expects. Transparency sounds simple until you remember that living tissue is crowded with structures that scatter light. Muscles, organs, blood, and connective fibers all have reasons to be visible. To become clear is not merely to lose color. It is to reorganize the body so that light passes through with fewer interruptions, as if the animal has accepted a difficult architectural constraint and made a life within it. That is why true invisibility is rare even here. Many transparent animals still keep some parts dark or opaque. The gut may show after feeding. The eye, which needs pigment to work, often remains visible. And yet, partial disappearance is enough. In dim water, reducing the number of clues can matter as much as removing them entirely. There are also bodies that shine not by producing light, but by returning it. The sides of some fishes are silvered with layers of crystals that act like mirrors, reflecting the surrounding water rather than presenting a stable color of their own. In brighter seas, silver can flash. Here, in weak and scattered light, it can do something quieter. It can break the body into borrowed brightness. A hatchetfish seen from one angle may look like a piece of polished metal suspended in blue dusk. Seen from another, it nearly vanishes. The flanks reflect what is around them, and the body becomes difficult to separate from the shifting field of light and shadow. Yet mirror skin in the ocean is not a simple mirror like the one on a wall. It must work in many directions at once, under moving light, in a medium that never stops changing. Researchers have found that some deep living fishes use stacks of microscopic crystals, often made of guanine, arranged with careful spacing inside the skin. These layers reflect certain angles and wavelengths in ways that help preserve a silvery appearance, even in complicated underwater light. What makes this more than an elegant surface is what it suggests about evolution's patience. Even reflection has been engineered here with the restraint of a long experiment. And then there are eyes. In a place where bodies struggle not to be seen, seeing still matters. Many Twilight Zone animals have eyes that seem too large for their heads, round and dark and quietly startling when brought to the surface. But in the water where they belong, oversized eyes are not extravagance. They are a way of gathering what little remains. A larger eye can collect more photons, and in dim water, that can be the difference between detecting a sinking morsel, a drifting companion, or the faint outline of danger below. Some species angle their tubular eyes upward, concentrating their vision on the light above where silhouettes are most likely to appear. The posture of the eye tells you where the worry lives. It lives overhead. This creates a strange intimacy between hunter and hunted. Both are reading the same thin page of brightness. Both are looking for interruptions in it. One body evolves to erase its underside with light. Another evolves wider pupils and more sensitive retinas to recover the hidden outline anyway. And the conversation continues over countless generations. Invisibility is not a finished state. It is a moving boundary between detection and escape. Some animals even carry red or black pigments in places where that seems counterintuitive. Red disappears quickly with depth because red wavelengths from the sun do not reach far. In the Twilight Zone, red can function almost like black. A shrimp or fish touched with deep crimson may appear dark and hard to distinguish in the blue field, hidden by a color the ambient light no longer fully reveals. The surface teaches us one meaning of color, but depth writes another. Black, too, becomes a tool, though not always in the way we might assume. Certain fishes use extremely dark skin inside the mouth or along the body, reducing stray reflections that might give away their presence. A predator with a black-lined mouth can open it in dim water without offering much gleam back to the world. That is a severe kind of concealment. Even hunger learns to hide its own opening. What makes all these strategies feel so unified is that they are not separate inventions piled together at random. They are responses to one specific condition, a world where there is enough light to betray you, but not enough to see clearly by. In full daylight, camouflage often imitates patterns and colors. In full darkness, concealment belongs more to touch, sound, or simple absence. But here, in the middle, the body must manage uncertainty itself. A bristle mouth, small enough to rest across a few fingers, may carry light organs, dark pigmentation, reflective surfaces, and upward-looking eyes all at once. None of these guarantees safety. They only improve the odds. Yet life often advances through odds, not certainty. And the Twilight Zone may be one of the clearest reminders that survival is sometimes an art of becoming statistically difficult to notice. There is an ecological quietness to this. When countless small animals remain unseen a little longer, they feed a little more, survive another day, rise and sink again with the larger rhythm of the sea. Their concealment does not only protect individual bodies, it helps preserve the movement of carbon, the transfer of energy, the long patient exchange between surface waters and depth. A hidden fish still changes the planet. That is the wonder pivot here. Invisibility can sound like withdrawal, as though the vanished creature has stepped out of the world. Yet the opposite is true. These animals disappear so they can remain within the world, eating, avoiding, mating, migrating, carrying life onward through a place that would otherwise expose them. Not being seen becomes a way of continuing to belong. And there is tenderness in the details. A transparent lava drifting almost without edges. A squid dimming its belly lamps as clouds pass overhead and the light above shifts by degrees. A hatchetfish turning slightly, and with that turn becoming first an object, then a reflection, then almost nothing at all. The ocean does not hand out invisibility freely. It asks for attention to angle, intensity, timing, and form. Imagine how patient natural selection must be to shape such answers. Not through intention, and not through design in any human sense, but through the slow keeping of what works a little better in dim water. A body less easily outlined survives. A skin that reflects more evenly survives. An eye that catches one more trace of light survives. Over vast spans, the almost invisible become common. The result is a community made partly of absences. Nets brought up from mesopelagic depths sometimes seem to reveal creatures that were never meant to be looked at in air or daylight, and their oddity can distract from their original elegance. But down where they live, these same forms are coherent. The silver side, the glassy tissue, the small lanterns, the huge eyes. Each feature belongs to a geometry of faint light and quiet risk. Seen this way, the Twilight Zone is not merely dim. It is optically crowded with negotiations. Every direction carries a different problem. Above is glow. Below is silhouette. Beside you is reflected shimmer. Within your own tissues are pigments and fluids that may either conceal or betray. To inhabit such a place is to become a careful manager of appearance, though the animal itself knows none of these words. And yet, the calmest part may be this. No creature here becomes invisible all the time. Water shifts, angles change. Someone is always better adapted to notice than another is to hide. The Twilight Zone is not a place of perfect solutions. It is a place of near misses, softened edges, delayed recognitions, and brief mercies measured in fractions of light. So a fish drifts beneath the distant day with lamps along its belly, a mirrored side, and eyes wide to the faint blue above. It is not absent. It is exquisitely adjusted. In this middle layer, where sunlight does not quite stay and darkness does not quite take over, life persists by learning how to belong to both conditions at once. And after a while, that feels less like deception than harmony. The animal does not vanish in order to leave the scene. It vanishes in order to fit it more perfectly. Body and water come into closer agreement. Light passes, or reflects, or is answered softly from below. The outline loosens. Then the scene grows quiet again. A few pale particles drift downward. The blue overhead dims by another shade too subtle to name. Somewhere beneath that fading ceiling, small lanterns balance themselves against the light, mirrors borrow the color of water, and clear bodies glide through the darkening middle almost without a trace. And the Twilight Zone is not only a home for life, but also a quiet worker in the larger life of Earth. A great deal of the planet's carbon passes through dim water that most people never think about. It does not happen in one dramatic plunge. It happens as a long settling, a patient exchange between surface brightness and the dark beneath, carried by crumbs, bodies, waste, mucus, shells, and the slow endings of countless small lives. The movement is so gentle that it can be hard to feel, yet it helps decide how much carbon remains in the air above the sea. It helps. At the surface, sunlight feeds plankton, and plankton make living tissue from carbon dioxide dissolved in seawater. Some of that carbon stays near the top for a while, moving through fish and jellies and drifting grazers. Yet some of it begins to fall. Dead cells, loose fecal pellets, abandoned feeding webs, broken fragments of larger bodies, and sticky clumps of organic matter drift downward together in what oceanographers call marine snow. The name is soft, and the process is soft too. Marine snow is not one thing. It is a weather made of remains. A flake may contain phytoplankton, bacteria, dust, bits of jelly tissue, minerals, and the husks of tiny shells, all pressed into a sinking particle by mucus and chance. It drifts through the Twilight Zone as if the upper ocean were always shedding a faint, constant winter. It is a strange kind of snowfall. That is why the Twilight Zone is full of animals built to notice what descends. Many do not rely on food appearing beside them. They wait for the ocean itself to deliver it, and the ocean does. Some catch sinking particles directly. Some feed on the microbes that bloom across those particles. Some eat the animals that have gathered to feed there, so that one falling speck becomes, for a moment, a small moving world. Nothing falls alone for long. And this downward rain is more than a feeding system. It is also part of the planet's way of moving carbon out of fast circulation near the atmosphere. When organic matter sinks, the carbon inside it leaves the surface ocean, where exchange with the air happens most readily. If that carbon is eaten and breathed back out near the surface, it can return quickly. If it sinks deeper first, the timeline changes, sometimes by a great deal. What makes this so important is time. Carbon near the surface can rejoin the air on human timescales through waves, wind, and mixing. Carbon carried downward and kept below may stay away from the atmosphere for years, decades, centuries, or longer, depending on how deep it goes and how currents move. The difference is not visible from shore, yet the climate feels it. The ocean does not simply absorb carbon and hide it, it sorts it. Some is returned almost at once through respiration and decay in shallow water. Some is processed in the twilight zone, where sinking particles are broken apart, eaten, transformed, and partly respired into dissolved inorganic carbon at depth. Some continues deeper still, entering the long interior circulation of the sea. It is a conveyor, but a very slow one. Much of the action happens here, in the mesopelagic, because this is where a large share of sinking material is intercepted. The particles leaving the surface do not usually arrive intact in the abyss. They are met, consumed, fragmented, repackaged and altered on the way down. Copepods graze on them. Small fish and crustaceans seize what gathers around them. Bacteria digest the softer parts. Fecal pellets may sink faster than the loose material that made them. Form changes everything. A soft particle can drift for days while microbes steadily undo it. A compact pellet can fall much faster, carrying carbon deeper before it is recycled. Minerals can act as ballast. Sticky mucus can gather tiny bits into larger sinking aggregates. The architecture of a particle affects its fate, which means the shape of marine snow can influence the chemistry of the whole planet. Scale becomes strange here. Even waste becomes consequential. In the twilight zone, fecal pellets are not merely leftovers. They are transport. Packed into denser form, organic carbon can descend more efficiently than it would as scattered fragments. Some pellets are consumed on the way down. Some break apart. Some sink beyond the busiest layers of recycling. That is why the daily ordinary business of digestion joins the vast work of climate, quietly and without intention. Life is always doing this. It solves the local problem first. How to eat, how to package, how to survive another day. Yet from those small solutions, a planetary system emerges. No animal in the twilight zone is trying to regulate the atmosphere. Still, together, by living as they must, these communities help shape the air over continents they will never know. There is a humility in that. The migrants add another pathway. Animals that feed near the surface at night and return to deeper water by day do not just move themselves. They carry carbon downward inside living bodies. A lanternfish rises into richer water, eats there, and later descends into the twilight zone, where it respires, excretes, and is sometimes eaten. In other words, carbon travels not only as falling debris, but as muscle, blood, oil, and hunger. This active transport matters because it can be more direct than passive sinking. Instead of waiting for a particle to drift downward through layers of consumers, a migrating animal feeds high and releases carbon lower down within hours. The commute becomes chemistry. The vertical rhythm that shapes twilight life also helps move the products of surface photosynthesis away from the atmosphere-facing skin of the sea. Motion becomes storage. That means the great daily migration is not only one of Earth's largest animal movements, it is also one of its quieter carbon pumps. Billions upon billions of small creatures make the trip, each carrying a tiny burden of surface-derived carbon into dimmer water. One body is almost nothing. Countless bodies, moving every night across the planet, become a mechanism large enough to matter to climate models and global budgets. The scale settles in slowly. Some carbon moves deeper still when those migrants die below. A fish that fed near the surface may be consumed in the twilight zone. A squid may descend and release waste at depth. A gelatinous animal may fall after death as a rich, sudden package for scavengers below. Each pathway differs in speed and distance. Yet all of them complicate the idea that carbon simply drifts downward like dust. It is carried by appetite. The old phrase for this broad process is the biological pump. It sounds mechanical, though nothing here is metal or regular in the human sense. There are no pistons, no single chamber. Instead, there are algae in sunlight, particles forming from fragments, microbes digesting, animals migrating, predators feeding, pellets sinking, carcasses falling, currents holding some things and releasing others. A pump made of living uncertainty is still a pump. And because it is alive, it changes with the living world. If plankton communities shift, the size and chemistry of sinking particles shift with them. If fish populations rise or fall, active transport can change. If warming alters stratification near the surface, nutrients and productivity may change, which then alters how much carbon is fixed in the first place. The conveyor is not a machine outside nature. It is nature in motion. Scientists are still working out exactly how much carbon the Twilight Zone processes and how much it helps sequester over long periods. The numbers are difficult because the zone itself is difficult. Particles are patchy. Migrators move. Organisms are fragile. Nets miss some things and damage others. Instruments can estimate a flux one day and find a different pattern the next. The ocean keeps its accounting in a scattered hand. Yet even with uncertainty, the lesson is not vagueness. It is scale. This dim band of water far below most boats' immediate notice and far beyond ordinary sight helps modulate the exchange between ocean and air. It participates in the breathing balance of the planet. The atmosphere above cities is linked, however distantly, to what happens when a swarm of small fish feeds at night and returns by morning to deeper cold. Distant things touch. There is another quiet turn in this story. Carbon that is respired in the Twilight Zone does not vanish. It becomes dissolved carbon dioxide in deeper water, where it may remain isolated from the atmosphere until currents eventually bring that water back toward the surface. In some places, that return may take a long time. The sea is not simply a sink. It is a keeper of delays. That may be one of the deepest functions of the Twilight Zone. Not erasure, but postponement. Not disappearance, but storage in motion. Carbon enters life in sunlight and is then moved, transformed, and held in layers where return becomes slower and less certain. The planet's climate responds not only to how much carbon exists, but to how quickly it cycles between air, water, and flesh. Slowness matters, and the Twilight Zone is a realm of slowness. Particles descend at different rates, from the almost suspended to the surprisingly swift. Migrators rise and fall on a daily pulse. Bacteria work continuously, but not hurriedly. Water masses turn over on scales beyond any animal's awareness. A region defined by fading light becomes, in a sense, a region that lengthens time. It stretches the interval between one form of carbon and another. What makes this beautiful is how ordinary the pieces are. A pellet, a fragment of diatom, a smear of mucus, a dead salp sinking in cold water, the breath of a fish released hundreds of meters below where it fed. None of these would seem, on their own, like part of Earth's climate system. Yet the planet is full of systems made from small repeated acts, and the ocean may be the most patient example of all. There is also a kind of fairness in the arrangement. The surface ocean receives light and grows abundance from it. Beneath, the Twilight Zone receives the remains and makes use of those as well. Very little is without consequence. Even what is no longer wanted becomes food, transport or delay. The dim middle waters are not a graveyard under the bright sea. They are a place where endings continue to work. And yet, this work is vulnerable. If humans remove vast amounts of mesopelagic life, the carbon pathways may change. If warming, acidification, and deoxygenation alter who lives here and how they feed, the efficiency of transport may change too. Scientists are careful with these questions because the system is complex. Complexity does not mean irrelevance. It means we are touching something large enough that simple answers may fail. The deeper wonder is that climate regulation is not only a matter of clouds, forests, and ice. It is also a matter of dim water filled with drifting particles and animals commuting through the dark. The Earth keeps balance through places that do not resemble balance at all. A region that seems hidden and sparse turns out to be busy with planetary consequence. The familiar world depends on distant quiet. Even the phrase carbon cycle can sound abstract, as if it belongs only on diagrams. In the Twilight Zone, it becomes tactile. It is soft matter sinking. It is bodies digesting. It is respiration at depth. It is a transfer from bright, quick exchange toward colder, slower keeping. Once you feel that, the chemistry stops being remote. It becomes almost intimate. Perhaps that is one of the more humbling things the mesopelagic offers. The planet is stabilized not only by grand visible structures, but by faint processes beneath notice. A snowfall no one sees. A migration hidden by darkness. 1,000 small acts of feeding and excretion repeated until they add up to a force large enough to shape air and temperature. The world is held together by quiet labor. And so the Twilight Zone does its work without surface drama. Beneath waves that reflect the sky, below weather and ships and the passing attention of day, carbon continues to settle, be eaten, be carried, be delayed. The whole system moves with neither haste nor pause. It simply goes on. That is enough to rest with for a while. A hidden layer of the sea helping the planet keep time with itself. Above, the air. Below, the slow, dark water receiving what falls. Between them, this patient middle realm, turning fragments into futures and letting them drift. When energy is scarce, every movement, every shape, and every habit begins to carry a different meaning. In the Twilight Zone, feeding is rarely a matter of abundance. It is a matter of timing, restraint, and taking what arrives before it drifts past into the larger dark. Hunger here does not produce constant frenzy so much as a quiet discipline. Much of the food begins somewhere above. Tiny flakes of dead plankton, loose fecal pellets, abandoned mucus houses, shredded fragments of bodies, and the soft remains of things already eaten all settle downward through dim water. By the time this slow weather reaches the mesopelagic, it is thinner than it was near the surface, more scattered and uncertain, yet still enough to support countless mouths. That is why falling matter becomes more than debris here. It becomes promise. Some animals do not chase that promise at all. They wait inside it. Gelatinous drifters spread delicate feeding structures through the water, almost like patient nets made of living thread, and let the current deliver what it can. A siphonophore may trail a long curtain of tentacles behind it, each strand armed to catch passing plankton or tiny crustaceans, turning open water into a kind of suspended field where chance can be harvested slowly. The animal does not need to dominate the water around it. It only needs to inhabit it with precision. This is one of the quiet lessons of the Twilight Zone. Feeding can be active, but it can also be architectural. A body can become a filter, a trap, a veil, a slow-made answer to a place where prey is too scattered to pursue endlessly. In other words, form itself becomes a way of eating. Larvosians do this in a particularly strange and gentle way. The animal is small, almost tadpole-like, but around its body it secretes a transparent house of mucus, an elaborate inflatable structure that channels water through fine filters. As water passes, edible particles are caught and concentrated, and the animal feeds from the flow it has quietly arranged around itself. It lives for a time inside something soft and self-made, and that house is both tool and environment. When the filter clogs, the house is abandoned. Another is made. The old one begins to sink, carrying trapped carbon and scraps of food downward into deeper water where other animals may meet it in the dark. That is why even a feeding structure, used briefly by one small drifter, can continue working after it is left behind. What makes this so moving is its economy. Nothing is grand. Nothing is wasted for long. A structure built to gather a meal becomes, after abandonment, a meal-bearing parcel for something else below. And the ocean keeps passing usefulness from one life to another without ceremony. It is a food web, but it is also a sequence of handoffs. Salps move through the Twilight Zone with a different kind of calm. Their bodies are clear, barrel-shaped, and quietly efficient, drawing water in at one end and pushing it out at the other. As they pulse, they swim and feed at the same time, straining tiny particles from immense volumes of water, turning motion itself into nourishment. Yet their feeding is not forceful. It is repetitive, almost meditative, and very old in its logic. There is a kind of boldness in eating what is too small to notice. It means trusting scale. It means living by accumulation, by the gathering of almost nothing over and over, until almost nothing becomes enough. In a place where large meals may be rare, this patient arithmetic can be one of the most reliable strategies there is. Other animals wait for larger chances. A bristlemouth, one of the most numerous vertebrates on Earth, may hover in dim water and watch the space above with its upward-facing eyes. Small crustaceans, larval fishes, and drifting morsels appear only briefly, sometimes outlined by the weak downwelling glow, and the fish rises just enough to meet them. The movement is slight. That matters. That is why ambush works so well here. A fast chase spends energy in a place that does not easily repay it. But a still body, balanced in the water, can turn a short burst into a profit. Predation becomes less about violence than about choosing the one moment worth paying for. Dragonfish take that principle and refine it into something almost severe. Long-bodied and dark, with teeth that look oversized even for deep water, they may drift nearly motionless until prey comes close enough to seize. Some species carry a barbel beneath the chin that glows faintly, a lure suspended in front of the mouth where attention can be redirected in a world with little light and many uncertainties. The trick is simple. The meaning of it is not. A lure is an admission about the ocean. It says that distance is expensive. It says that in a sparse world, it may be better to change another animal's path than to change your own. That is a quiet kind of intelligence, shaped not by abundance, but by the need to make every approach count. Hatchetfish operate with a different geometry. Their bodies are thin from side to side, like blades turned broadside into darkness, and they often hold themselves with extraordinary control beneath the faint light from above. From there, they watch for silhouettes crossing the dim field overhead, reading the smallest interruption in the remaining glow, then darting upward to intercept a copepod or other small traveler before settling back again. The strike is quick, but the life around it is mostly waiting. Waiting is easy to underestimate. From a human distance, it can seem passive, almost empty. Yet in the mesopelagic, waiting may involve continuous small calculations of buoyancy, posture, orientation, and risk, each one tuned to preserve more energy than it spends. Stillness here is often skilled work. Many Twilight Zone predators also have mouths that seem too large for their bodies. Gulper eels, swallower fishes, and loose-jaw species suggest a kind of excess at first glance. But the design begins to make sense in a place of irregular opportunity. If meals are unpredictable, then a rare encounter with something substantial cannot be wasted, because it is awkwardly shaped or unexpectedly big. The mouth becomes a hedge against famine. And yet the larger meaning is not greed. It is readiness. A body built to accept a feast only occasionally is a body shaped by long intervals of absence, and that makes these strange mouths feel less monstrous than patient. They are equipment for uncertainty. Some predators hunt with the help of light, but very carefully. In the Twilight Zone, to shine is always to risk being seen, so bioluminescence used in feeding tends to be precise rather than lavish. A tiny point, a faint lure, a brief flash near the mouth can be enough to attract the curious or confuse the small drawing prey across the last necessary distance. What matters is not brightness, it is placement. Small squid in this layer often live by such precision. They may drift with arms relaxed, then fold themselves into movement only when a shrimp or fish larva enters range, closing the gap in one neat pulse of the mantle. Beaks and grasping arms do the rest, and then the squid may return almost immediately to stillness, as though activity was something to be borrowed only briefly and then put away again. That rhythm suits the place. Even jellyfish, which can seem like creatures of pure drifting, are not merely at the mercy of chance. Some trail tentacles through productive layers and let contact do the work. Others pulse upward or hold themselves at certain depths where prey tends to pass, turning the vertical structure of the water into part of the hunt. The body appears soft and surrendering, yet the behavior can be exact. What makes this beautiful is how little it resembles our louder ideas of survival. There is very little wasted display here. The sea asks for sensitivity more than force, for timing more than conquest, and so many of its feeders become experts in gradients, in pulses, in the small probabilities that repeat through every hour. They live by attention. Opportunism has its place as well. Something dies above, or is bitten and partly lost, or sinks after spawning, and the Twilight Zone receives it in pieces. Fish that are usually hunters may become scavengers for a moment. Crustaceans gather. Soft-bodied drifters catch fragments in their filters. The distinction between hunter and collector blurs because the ocean does not separate its gifts so neatly. That is why flexibility matters. A rigid feeding style can fail when conditions shift, but a body and behavior that can accept many kinds of arrivals may remain fed through a wider range of nights. In a habitat built from inconsistency, versatility can feel almost like another organ. There are also animals whose lives are organized around very long gaps between meals. Some deep-living fish have reduced muscle, low metabolic rates, and tissues that do not demand much from the scant resources around them. They may eat infrequently and digest slowly, extending the value of a single successful capture across many quiet hours or days. The meal continues inside them long after the chase is over. This matters beyond the individual. An ecosystem of sparse food cannot be filled only with urgent bodies burning fuel at a rapid pace. It also requires creatures able to stretch time, to turn one event into many hours of survival, and to remain part of the community even when the water offers little. Endurance here is metabolic as much as behavioral. Copepods and other tiny crustaceans, though small, are part of nearly every version of this story. They graze, nibble, seize, filter, and themselves become food for larger animals, linking the rain from above to hunters suspended in the dim. A single copepod may spend its life making a living from particles almost too fine to see, only to become, in one quick moment, the entire reason a fish has enough energy to continue through another night. Scale keeps folding inward. In other words, the Twilight Zone is fed by translation. Large things become small things. Falling things become swimming things. A drifting particle becomes a Lavacean meal, which becomes fish flesh, which may become the strength for a nighttime ascent, which then returns carbon and energy to another depth by morning. The path is rarely direct. It is still continuous. There are failures, of course, and many of them pass without witness. A strike misses. A filter clogs too soon. A sinking scrap goes untouched. A predator spends more than it gains. Yet the system persists because it is not built around perfection. It is built around enough. That may be the central grace of feeding here. The ocean does not ask each encounter to succeed. It asks only that success happen often enough, distributed across millions of bodies and countless nights, for the layer to keep breathing in its quiet way. Life in the mesopelagic is not lavish, but it is persistent, and persistence can be its own abundance. Imagine the water at this depth on a calm night. Small particles are still descending. A salp pulses through a thin cloud of nourishment. A hatchetfish holds steady below the failing glow. Somewhere nearby, a dragonfish keeps its patience and lets the dark carry opportunity to its mouth. Nothing about the scene looks rich by surface standards, and yet feeding is happening everywhere. That is the final shift in how this place is understood. Scarcity does not mean emptiness. It means that value is spread thinly across distance and time, requiring bodies able to sense faint chances, accept modest returns, and continue without waste. The Twilight Zone makes a living from fragments, and in doing so, it reveals a broader truth about life beneath the sun's last reach. It is not always speed that sustains a world. Sometimes it is restraint. Sometimes it is a filter fine as lace, or a mouth that can wait, or a soft body that spends almost nothing while the ocean slowly delivers what it can. Beneath the fading light, nourishment is rarely dramatic, but it is constant enough. And because it is constant enough, the layer holds. Countless small feedings, most unnoticed, keep its migrations moving, its hunters suspended, its drifters alive, and its carbon traveling onward through the dark. The work is dispersed until it nearly disappears from view. Yet it continues. By the time one considers all of this together, feeding in the Twilight Zone begins to seem less like a contest than a conversation between bodies and scarcity. The water offers little at once. but it offers little continually, and life has answered with filters, lures, pauses, enlarged mouths, slow digestion, and the willingness to make use of whatever arrives. It is a quiet agreement, and the quiet remains. Over time, a place like this does not merely shape behavior, it shapes the body itself. A fish from the Twilight Zone can look unfinished to surface eyes. Its muscles may be soft, its bones light, its body loose in a way that seems almost temporary. Yet this is not poor construction. It is a design fitted to a world where speed is brief, food is uncertain, and water does much of the holding. Many Twilight Zone animals are built less like sprinters and more like suspended thoughts. Dense muscle is expensive to grow and costly to carry. Heavy skeletons are useful when force matters, but in dim mid-water, force is often the wrong answer. What makes this strange softness so effective is that it turns the body into something closer to neutral, neither eager to sink nor wasteful to keep aloft. That is why so many mesopelagic fishes feel delicate when brought up in nets. Their tissues are often watery. Their bones can be thin and only lightly mineralized. In life, surrounded by pressure and supported on all sides, they are not fragile in the way they seem to us. They are simply built for a medium that is always holding them. There is a quiet elegance in that. On land, and even at the surface, bodies often declare themselves through resistance. They brace against gravity, currents, impact, and speed. Here, evolution has found another path, letting the body cooperate with the water so completely that solidity itself becomes negotiable. Some species go further and replace heaviness with chemistry. They fill tissues with oils or wax esters that are lighter than seawater. Others reduce bone and muscle until the whole animal hovers with very little effort. A few use gelatinous flesh, not because it is strong in the ordinary sense, but because it is cheap to maintain and good at taking up space without taking up much mass. A large body made of soft material changes what an animal can be. It can seem bigger than its actual substance would suggest. It can drift, glide, and wait without paying the energetic cost that firmer tissue would demand. In a place where each calorie may arrive late, shape itself becomes part of the food budget. This is one of the quiet lessons of the Twilight Zone. We often think of good design as sturdy, fast, and decisive. Yet between bright water and the abyss, success can look slack, translucent, and patient. Efficiency here is not power. It is the art of not spending more than the dark will return. Some fish carry another solution inside them. Their swim bladders, when they have them, provide lift through gas. But gas at depth is a difficult bargain. As pressure rises, it compresses. As an animal moves up or down, that internal volume changes, and the body must manage the consequences carefully. That is why many Twilight Zone species either alter this organ in unusual ways or abandon it altogether. A gas-filled chamber works well near the surface, where pressure shifts are smaller over short distances. In the mesopelagic, especially for animals that travel vertically, gas can become a liability. A buoyancy system that changes too much with depth is like a float that cannot decide what level it belongs to. So other strategies appear: fatty tissues, low-density fluids, reduced skeletons, bodies that are nearly weightless by composition rather than inflation. In other words, these animals often solve the problem of hanging in the water by becoming, piece by piece, more like the water around them. There is something almost philosophical in that solution. The body does not conquer its environment. It yields into it with precision. It becomes less an object dropped into the sea and more a temporary pattern within the sea, a living shape held in a patient balance. And then there are the mouths. Some Twilight Zone fishes have mouths so large they seem out of proportion to the rest of the head. Their jaws may extend far back. Their teeth can be long, inward curving, and difficult to ignore. In the still dark, where meals may be rare and unpredictable, refusing large prey is a luxury many bodies cannot afford. The gulper eel is one of the more distant examples of this principle. Its mouth opens into a great expandable pouch, far wider than its narrow body suggests. It is not swallowing monsters every evening. More often, it seems to be built for chance, for the sudden availability of something too valuable to lose. The same logic appears in dragonfishes, viperfishes, and other hunters whose faces seem made almost entirely of opening. Hinged skulls, stretchable tissues, and stomachs that can expand allow them to take prey near their own size. A small predator in a sparse world can survive by being ready for an oversized opportunity. The body becomes an argument against waste. That has meaning beyond appetite. In brighter places, feeding can be selective. There are other chances, other schools, another dawn. Here, the future is less generous. The oversized mouth tells the story of uncertainty, written directly into anatomy. It says that when the world offers something, the body must be prepared to say yes. Some species are built like traps more than chasers. They have thin, dark bodies and great needle-like teeth that do not so much chew as prevent escape. The teeth may be too large to fit neatly inside the mouth when it closes. Yet, in dim water, neatness is not the point. Holding on is. A surface fish might invest in sustained swimming, precise turning, or armor against impact. A twilight predator may invest instead in that one irreversible moment when contact happens. This is what middle-depth living does to form. It favors not abundance, but readiness, not constant action, but successful interruption. The eyes tell a different version of the same story. Many mesopelagic animals have enormous eyes relative to their bodies. In some, the eyes face upward more than sideways, as if the whole face has tilted toward the last of the light. They are not searching for broad daylight. They are gathering remnants. Large eyes help capture scarce photons. In dim water, a wider pupil and a larger retinal surface can mean the difference between seeing a silhouette and seeing nothing at all. Upward-pointing tubular eyes, found in some fishes, are especially tuned for detecting faint shapes above. The world they need to read is not all around them equally. It is mostly overhead. That directional seeing is a reminder that light does not simply vanish. It weakens into information with very little margin. A body can specialize for that narrow margin so completely that its face becomes a map of the light field itself. The animal wears the physics of its habitat as anatomy. Yet not every creature chooses giant eyes. Some reduce vision and lean more heavily on other senses. Mechanoreception, the ability to detect water movement and vibration, can become especially important. Chemical sensing also matters, carrying news through the water that eyes cannot always provide. In a place defined by partial visibility, no single sense rules absolutely. That is what makes these bodies feel so carefully negotiated. More eye means more tissue to build and maintain. More sensory surface means more exposure, more cost, more developmental investment. Evolution does not create perfect creatures. It creates compromises that hold together long enough to work. And some compromises are almost beautiful in their restraint. The hatchetfishes, for example, are thin from side to side and deep from back to belly, like polished blades turned on edge. From below, they can be hard to distinguish against the faint light above. From the side, they present very little profile. Shape itself becomes camouflage. Their silvery flanks may reflect what little light remains. Their compressed bodies help them disappear in a world where being seen from the wrong angle can end everything quickly. Yet the shape also affects swimming, balance, and internal arrangement. A body is never one answer. It is several answers asked to live together. This is what the Twilight Zone does so well. It takes ordinary anatomical categories like eye, jaw, muscle, skin, and bone, and subjects each one to a different arithmetic. The sums come out strange. They also come out true. Transparency, so useful nearer the surface, becomes more complicated here. In the upper ocean, clear tissues can make an animal nearly invisible in bright water. But deeper down, where bioluminescent flashes and faint downwelling light create sharper contrasts, complete transparency may not always solve the problem. Some animals remain glassy, others turn dark, red-black, or mirror-bright. A red-black body is one of the Twilight Zone's quieter tricks. Red light does not travel far to these depths, so red tissue appears nearly black. An animal can wear what would seem a vivid color above and become hidden below. The body is colored for an absence, painted to match wavelengths that no longer arrive. There is something gentle and strange in that idea. A creature can be adapted not to the light that exists, but to the light that has been lost. Its form makes sense only inside a missing world. Softness appears again in skin and connective tissue. Many midwater animals have loose skin, flexible joints, and bodies that can deform without much damage. In a place without hard seafloor contact most of the time, and without much need to resist crushing from above in the way we imagine, rigidity can be unnecessary. Pressure is immense, yes, but it is also even, pressing everywhere at once. That is why compressible spaces are often the real danger, not soft flesh itself. A body with few air spaces can tolerate depth more gracefully than one with trapped gas. Much of Twilight Zone anatomy makes quiet peace with this fact. It reduces emptiness inside. Even the daily movement of some species leaves its mark on form. Animals that travel hundreds of meters through changing pressure often carry bodies that can handle those shifts without elaborate internal correction. They may be narrow, soft, and economical. They may avoid structures that become troublesome during vertical travel. Their shape is a schedule made visible. And yet, these are not abyssal bodies either. That distinction matters. The deep abyss often favors forms adapted to total darkness, to still greater pressure, to a different kind of food economy, and to a more absolute separation from the sun. Twilight Zone creatures are citizens of a threshold. They remain tied to what filters down and what passes through. That middle existence gives them a particular kind of uncertainty. Light is weak but present. Prey is scarce but moving. Predators can come from above or below. The body must answer to two worlds without fully belonging to either. It must be fluent in transition. Perhaps that is why so many mesopelagic animals appear slightly improbable, as though assembled from parts borrowed from several environments at once. huge eyes and weak muscles, delicate bones and enormous jaws, tiny bodies with luminous organs, softness paired with precision. The combinations seem odd only because we are used to thinking that habitats should be clear and singular. But a gradient asks for another kind of life, not surface life made dimmer, not abyssal life made shallower. Something else, something tuned to almost, to neither, to between. Even evolution seems patient here. It has not rushed toward one ideal shape. It has produced many workable suspensions, many ways of being held in cold water under fading light. One lineage leans into buoyant oils, another into gelatinous tissue, another into eyes so large they seem to remember the sun. None is the final answer. There may not be one. That may be the deepest wonder in these bodies. Transition is often treated as temporary, as though the in-between exists only to be crossed. Yet here, the in-between became home. Over long ages, uncertainty itself turned into habitat, and habitat into form. So the soft fish, the loose skeleton, the upward eye, the impossible mouth, the nearly weightless flesh, all begin to say the same quiet thing. Life does not only adapt to stable certainties, it can also adapt to partial light, shifting depth, and incomplete information. It can specialize for hesitation. And as the water grows darker still, those shapes seem less strange. They begin to feel inevitable. Of course, a body living here would surrender heaviness. Of course, it would widen the mouth, enlarge the eye, soften the bone, and let the sea do part of the work. In a place defined by suspension, the body learns to suspend. Then it simply remains there for a while, held, drifting, adequate to its dim and patient world. And for all that lives here, the Twilight Zone has remained, even to us, a place of partial outlines. We know it is full. We know it is busy in its own slow way. We know that every night and every day, immense numbers of animals pass through it, feed within it, hide inside it, and sink or rise through its dim water. And yet, when we try to say exactly how many lives are there, the answers loosen in our hands. They do not hold still. That is not because science has failed. It is because this place resists being made simple. The Twilight Zone is wide beyond ordinary feeling, stretched around the planet in a band so vast that any ship crossing above it touches only a very small piece of the whole. And the creatures within it are often soft, fragile, transparent, scattered, and always moving. Even abundance can be hard to see. A forest can be entered. A field can be walked. Even a desert, for all its distance, offers the eye a horizon and a ground. But the Twilight Zone gives neither in any familiar way, because it is a deep volume rather than a surface, a living thickness of water where animals may be above you, below you, beside you, or gone before your instruments arrive. It is presence without easy boundaries. That changes what it means to know a place. On land, counting often begins with standing somewhere and looking. Here, sight is weak, bodies are delicate, pressure matters, and the act of bringing something upward can alter it so much that what reaches the deck may already be only part of what it was below. Knowledge arrives changed. A net can pass through the water and return with living evidence. Yet a net is also a rough question. It samples one path through a moving world, and many Twilight Zone animals are built so softly that scales rub away, tissues tear, eyes cloud, and gelatinous forms collapse into something that tells the truth only incompletely. The answer comes home damaged. That is why older pictures of the deep mid-water often missed so much. The animals were there all along, but some were too fragile to survive capture in recognizable form. Some avoided the gear, some slipped through meshes, and some lived in patterns that became visible only when scientists began watching them where they actually were, still suspended in their own dark water. The method shaped the mystery. Acoustic instruments changed part of that story. Sound could travel where hands could not. When researchers sent pulses into the sea and read the returning echoes, they discovered layers and movements that hinted at astonishing amounts of life, so much that at times the ocean seemed to produce a false bottom, a ghostly seafloor made not of rock, but of countless animals reflecting sound back upward. A bottom that rose at night. That image has stayed with many oceanographers. A seafloor made of bodies, not a solid thing, not truly a floor, but a moving veil of life dense enough to imitate one on instruments. And in that confusion, there is something quietly beautiful about how the ocean can gather living creatures into forms our machines mistake for geology. Life can resemble landscape, yet even sound does not solve everything. An echo is not a census. Different animals reflect differently depending on size, shape, orientation, and whether they carry gas, lipids, hard parts, or almost nothing solid at all. So translating sound into bodies and bodies into biomass becomes an act of inference, calibration, revision, and patient doubt. The numbers must be earned, and the numbers have shifted, sometimes dramatically. In the early years, many estimates of mesopelagic biomass were modest beside what later acoustic surveys suggested. And then came the unsettling possibility that the Twilight Zone might contain far more fish and fish-like animals than scientists had long assumed, perhaps several times more, perhaps much more than that, depending on method and region. The hidden middle grew larger. What makes this so arresting is not only scale, it is the correction itself. A part of Earth large enough to influence carbon cycling, large enough to host one of the greatest daily movements on the planet, large enough to feed predators above and below, may also have been underestimated for decades simply because it is hard to measure a world that is dim, deep, moving, and soft. Ignorance can be enormous. There is a particular humility in that, not embarrassment, something quieter and more useful, the recognition that the planet is not obliged to present itself in forms our first tools can easily grasp, and that some of its most important systems continue their work beneath our categories until better questions slowly reach them. The ocean keeps its own counsel. In other words, uncertainty here is not emptiness. It is crowded uncertainty. The Twilight Zone is not unknown because nothing is there, but because so much is there in ways that blur, evade, dissolve, migrate, flash, disappear, and return, turning the old human hope of a neat inventory into something more patient and more provisional. A living estimate. Research vessels go out for weeks at a time. They lower instruments, deploy cameras, tow nets, sample water, and listen. They gather fragments from a realm that can never be held all at once. And then on shore those fragments are compared with other fragments from other voyages until patterns begin to emerge like constellations. Not complete, but enough to suggest a shape in the dark. Enough for now. Cameras have changed things too. A lens can be gentler than a net. Remotely operated vehicles, baited systems, and carefully lit observations allow animals to be seen in the water that supports them, with their posture, transparency, color, and behavior more intact. And each intact sighting reminds us how much of an animal belongs to its surroundings. Taken out, it becomes another thing. That matters beyond technique. It touches philosophy. When a creature collapses on its way to the surface, we are reminded that knowledge is never only about reaching an object, because sometimes the object is inseparable from the pressure, darkness, and buoyant stillness that hold its form together. To know it, we must meet it there, and still, even there, we do not fully arrive. The lights of a submersible alter a scene. The presence of equipment may attract or repel. The camera frames only one angle in one moment, and the twilight zone continues beyond that frame in every direction, full of unseen crossings and half-seen lives that leave traces but not complete stories. The missing remains part of the truth. There are species no one has formally described. There are lineages known from a handful of specimens. There are animals photographed but not captured, captured but not fully understood, sequenced in bits of drifting environmental DNA, but not yet linked with confidence to bodies moving through the water, and each category is its own kind of partial acquaintance. We know and do not know. Environmental DNA has opened another quiet door. Seawater carries signatures. A sample taken from the ocean can contain traces shed by animals that passed through hours earlier or farther away, and from those traces scientists infer who may be present, which means the water itself has become a kind of archive, faint and temporary, written in fragments. The sea remembers briefly. What makes this especially moving is how indirect it is. We do not see the body. We meet an after-image of presence, a molecular whisper that says something living was here. And in that method, there is a deep likeness to the Twilight Zone itself, because so much of what we know about it comes not as full encounter, but as impression, echo, residue, outline. Knowledge arrives by drift. Even the word biomass can feel strangely abstract here. It sounds like bookkeeping. But when scientists revise biomass upward, they are not merely adjusting a graph. They are admitting that the ocean may hold far more breathing, feeding, glowing, vanishing life in this middle realm than we had let ourselves picture. And the emotional effect of that is larger than the statistic. The dark becomes more inhabited. 1 billion small bodies are still bodies. A swarm is still made of singular lives. Each one senses pressure, light, movement, hunger, danger, and the changing pull of day above. And when estimates rise, what grows is not just quantity, but the felt density of existence in a layer once imagined by many as sparse and empty. The middle fills in, and yet it never fully fills in. There is comfort in that too. Not every map must close its edges, and perhaps part of maturity in science is learning the difference between mystery that shrinks through careful work and mystery that remains because the world is genuinely more intricate than our wish for a complete ledger. Both kinds are real. The Twilight Zone asks for that distinction. It rewards exactness and also patience. It lets us measure migrating layers, estimate standing stocks, refine carbon budgets, identify species, and model distributions, while at the same time reminding us that any account we make is a temporary arrangement of evidence around a moving reality that does not pause for our understanding. It goes on without us. There is something ancient in that feeling, not because the methods are old, but because the situation is. Humans have always lived beside immensities that exceed us, And perhaps what changes over time is not the size of the unknown, but the grace with which we learn to approach it, carrying tools in one hand and restraint in the other. The better science becomes, the gentler it sometimes sounds. To say, "we do not yet know," can be a very exact sentence. It can also be a peaceful one. In a culture that often treats uncertainty as failure, the Twilight Zone offers another model, where uncertainty is the honest border of attention, the place where observation has reached as far as it can for now, and then waits, alert and unashamed, at the edge of further darkness. A calm frontier. Perhaps that is one reason this layer lingers in the mind. It is hidden, but not absent. It affects the whole planet while remaining only partly visible, and that combination feels familiar in a deeper way, because so much of reality works like this, not only in oceans, but in memory, weather, history, and even in our own inner lives, where influence is often clearer than outline. So much moves half-seen. The Twilight Zone becomes more than a region to sample. It becomes a correction to human confidence. Not a harsh one, not a humiliating one, but a soft and steady reminder that the world is larger in fact than it is in habit, and that one of the most intelligent responses to such largeness is not conquest, but careful listening, to listen longer. And so the hidden numbers remain partly hidden. They narrow, shift, and deepen. New surveys will revise old ones. New instruments will find what older ones blurred, and still this dim band of the ocean will likely keep some portion of itself uncounted, not out of malice, but because a living water column full of fragile motion is not the kind of thing that yields all at once. It yields in pieces. That may be enough. A clearer outline, a better estimate held with lighter hands. And beneath it, the quiet knowledge that Earth still contains immense realities that do not become less real for being difficult to count, difficult to hold, or difficult to name completely. They remain. Far below the weather and far above the abyss, the Twilight Zone continues in its patient way. Bodies rise and sink. Sound travels out and returns altered. Cameras catch a passing gleam. A sample bottle closes on water, carrying traces of someone unseen. And the long work of understanding goes on without hurry in a world that was never made for hurry. The dark keeps some of its distance. And perhaps that distance is part of the gift. Not certainty, but nearness to it. Not complete knowledge, but the feeling of standing very quietly before something vast that can be studied, described, and even partly counted, while still remaining larger than the count. Larger and still there. Perhaps that is why this layer lingers in the imagination. It is not only a place in the ocean, but a kind of idea. The Twilight Zone is difficult to hold in simple language. It is not day, though day reaches into it. It is not night, though night is always gathering there. It is a region defined by almost. That word matters. We often speak as if the world is made of clear divisions: land and sea, light and dark, surface and depth, known and unknown. Yet much of life does not settle cleanly inside those borders, and this middle water makes that plain with unusual patience. It lives in the blurred edge between categories. It has the hush of something unfinished, though it has been here for ages. And because it resists our neat arrangements, it asks for a quieter kind of attention. Not the attention that names quickly, but the attention that stays. That may be one reason it feels so strangely familiar. Most living things spend at least some part of existence in transition. Dawn and dusk shape the day. Shorelines shift with tides. Seasons do not begin all at once. Even our own thoughts often drift between certainty and uncertainty without ever fully choosing one side. The ocean has a layer built out of that condition. It is a place where fading is not failure. It is simply the environment. That changes the feeling of what a habitat can be. A forest seems easy to picture as a complete place. A reef, too, feels richly itself. But the twilight zone is made from less stable material, from dimness, gradient, and continual adjustment. And yet life there is not provisional in the way we might expect. It is complete in its own way. What makes this so interesting is that humans often treat the in-between as temporary. We think of thresholds as places to pass through. Hallways are for reaching rooms. Dusk is for waiting on night. Adolescence is discussed as preparation for adulthood. Uncertainty is treated as a problem that thought should solve. But the twilight zone is not waiting to become something else. It is not an unfinished surface. It is not a weakened abyss. It is a place where life has had immense stretches of time to become fully suited to partial light, partial concealment, partial contact with what lies above and below. In other words, the middle is not a compromise here. It is a destination. That is a subtle idea and a deep one. When life settles into a gradient rather than an extreme, it suggests that stability does not always come from permanence or clarity. Sometimes stability comes from learning how to read a world that is always changing by degree. Not this or that, but more or less. Not yes or no, but now and then. Not visible or hidden, but half seen. There is something almost philosophical in that. Existence here is calibrated rather than declared. A creature does not need a bright boundary to know where it belongs. It belongs through adaptation, through timing, through relation to faint cues that would barely seem like information to us. And that may be one of the quiet lessons of this water, though lesson is too tidy a word. The world does not reserve flourishing for the obvious places. It does not grant abundance only to what is brightly lit or firmly grounded or easily understood. Sometimes life becomes most itself where definitions soften. The twilight zone carries that softness everywhere. Its animals are often soft-bodied. Its edges are soft. Its light is soft. Even its visibility is soft, always partial, always drifting toward disappearance. Yet softness here is not weakness. It is a mode of fitting, a way of meeting pressure, scarcity, and uncertainty without breaking against them. That feels important. Human thought has long favored the solid and the clear. We trust what can be outlined. We admire what appears decisive. But the sea keeps presenting another possibility, one in which survival belongs just as much to those that yield, dim, drift, and adapt to conditions that never become fully one thing or another. The twilight zone becomes a kind of answer to a question we do not often know we are asking. Must life choose between opposites in order to thrive? Must a world be fully illuminated to be inhabited richly? Must visibility be the measure of importance? Apparently not. A great deal of the planet's living motion passes through dim water. Much of its patient exchange, its hidden labor, its slow transfer of matter and energy takes place beyond easy sight. The middle depths remind us that obscurity is not emptiness. It is often simply where our senses stop being sufficient. That is a humbling distinction. We are surface-shaped animals. Our eyes, our languages, our instincts for navigation all come from a world where edges can often be seen. Even our metaphors reveal this. We speak of shedding light on things. We talk about clear understanding. We call certainty bright and confusion murky, as if darkness itself were a kind of failure. The Twilight Zone gently refuses that prejudice. Here, dimness is not a defect in the environment. It is the environment. And life within it has not only tolerated that condition, but entered into deep relationship with it. Bodies, senses, behaviors, and rhythms all meet the half-light, not as a mistake to overcome, but as a medium to inhabit. That changes the meaning of darkness too. In ordinary thought, darkness can seem like an ending, a loss of information, the point where vision gives up. Yet in this layer, darkness is not absolute, and that matters. It arrives gradually. It mingles with what remains. It becomes something textured, something with degrees. A gradient asks for patience. When there is no sharp line, attention must become more sensitive. You begin to notice little shifts, a thinning glow, a change in color, a difference in how forms appear and then do not appear. Life here seems to have evolved inside that exact discipline, becoming fluent in nuance because nuance is the structure of the world. That fluency has a larger meaning. It suggests that intelligence, in the broadest sense, may often begin not in mastery, but in responsiveness. To live in a threshold is to become skilled at reading almost invisible change. It is to be guided by conditions that are real, consequential, and hard to describe. There is something ancient in that. Long before humans built categories, long before we divided nature into neat chapters and named each layer as if naming were understanding, the planet was already full of gradations. River mouths mixed salt and fresh. Ice advanced and retreated. Light weakened with depth. Warm and cold interwove. Life did not wait for a stable map. It entered those shifting borders and made homes there. The Twilight Zone belongs to that ancient pattern. It is one more reminder that Earth is not assembled from clean pieces, but from transitions. And transitions are not empty seams between real places. They are real places. That thought can widen as you stay with it. Perhaps we notice threshold worlds so strongly because they resemble inner life more than we admit. Few thoughts are fully bright. Few emotions are fully dark. Memory itself comes in gradients, with some moments sharp and many more softened at the edges. We live, much of the time, not in clarity, but in partial understanding, moving by hints, moods, and incomplete impressions. In that sense, this ocean layer feels oddly intimate. Not because human life is the same as deep water. It is not. But because both can be shaped by conditions that do not resolve neatly. We know what it is to continue without full illumination. We know what it is to make meaning in dimness. We know what it is to feel between one state and another for longer than expected. And yet the Twilight Zone removes any trace of human drama from that condition. It shows the in-between as something older, calmer, and far less troubled than our own language makes it sound. Here, ambiguity is ordinary. Suspension is ordinary. Life does not hurry to escape the middle. It stays. That staying may be the most contemplative part of all. A threshold in human architecture is crossed. A threshold in the sea can be inhabited for millions of years. The very thing we imagine as brief becomes, at oceanic scale, enduring. The temporary reveals itself as ancient. That reversal is beautiful. It also loosens another assumption, the one that treats margins as lesser than centers. We often imagine importance gathering in the main event, the bright surface, the dramatic abyss, the places that are easiest to picture. But between those headline realms lies a vast band where subtle processes continue without announcement. The middle can be immense, and the middle can hold worlds whose influence exceeds their visibility. That is true in the sea, and perhaps elsewhere too. So much of reality depends on regions and states that are easy to overlook because they do not declare themselves loudly. They drift beneath notice. They work in gradients. They shape outcomes from places that seem, at first glance, uncertain or secondary. The Twilight Zone asks us to reconsider what counts as central, not by argument, but by existing. What makes this especially gentle to think about is that nothing here needs to resolve. The layer does not become simpler if we contemplate it longer. It remains a place between places. It remains dim. It remains crowded and hidden, active and hushed, present and hard to fully perceive. And maybe that is enough. There is relief in a part of the world that does not demand a final definition. A region can matter profoundly without becoming fully clear in the mind. It can remain strange. It can remain distant. It can continue to exceed the language built for cleaner things. Some realities are like that. They are best met not with conquest, but with company. You return to them. You notice one more contour. You let an unresolved shape remain unresolved. The Twilight Zone invites exactly that kind of companionship, the patient kind, where understanding does not close around a thing but drifts beside it for a while. Imagine water so deep that sunlight is no longer a fact, but a memory still thinning. Then imagine life not merely enduring there, but belonging there so completely that the fading itself becomes a home. That is a strange thought, a quiet one. It stays with you. Perhaps because it suggests that incompleteness is not always lack. A half-lit world can still be whole. A hidden world can still be full. A life lived among gradual changes may be no less real, no less fitted, no less beautiful than one lived in open brightness. The ocean has been saying this for a very long time. Beneath the bright narratives we prefer, beneath the clean diagrams and the confidence of sharp labels, it keeps one immense layer in a state of patient ambiguity. And inside that ambiguity, countless beings glide, feed, rise, sink, avoid, sense, drift, and continue, as if the unresolved were not a problem at all, as if it was simply where life happens. There is comfort in that, though comfort may not be the exact word. More like a settling, a loosening of the need for edges. The Twilight Zone does not offer certainty. It offers something softer, the sense that the world is wide enough to hold conditions that never fully declare themselves, and life is wise enough to meet them anyway. That feels like a place to rest. So the layer remains where it has always been, beneath the bright water, above the deeper dark, vast, quiet, and suspended in its own patient almostness, not asking to be solved, only there. The water is colder here. You have no weight here. You are simply present in the dark. There is no body to speak of, only the water and you moving through it. Above you, there is still a memory of blue, not brightness. Only that faint, thinning color that remains when sunlight has traveled farther than it was meant to go and is letting go of the world one wavelength at a time. It lingers. Beneath you, the dark is not empty. It is waiting. It rises softly to meet the failing light, and the two do not fight each other here. They overlap. You drift in the layer between. Not day, not night. A patient middle where the familiar has thinned, but not disappeared, and the hidden has begun to take its place without hurry. It is enough. The water holds suspended things, a slow fall of particles. Fragments from the brighter world above settle through you in no straight line, turning, loosening, descending, as though even gravity must move more gently here. They keep coming. That drifting fall gives the place a kind of weather, not storms, not wind, only a continuous settling, a soft downward passage of what the upper ocean has made, used, shed, or left behind. The whole layer receives it. You move through this quiet exchange without touching it. Around you, small glints appear and are gone. Some are only the angle of faint light on a near-invisible body. Some are colder than reflection, produced from within, then closed again like a thought not spoken aloud. The dark accepts both. A silver side turns and vanishes. Something nearly transparent passes through the weak blue from above and becomes almost nothing at all. What makes this world so strange is how often presence here takes the form of refusal, as though survival has become the art of participating without declaring yourself. So much life is built around not being seen. Far above, the surface still exists, yet it no longer feels near. It is a distant ceiling of diluted light, and all through the water beneath it, bodies hang, rise, wait, sink, and glide, according to rhythms older than any ship passing overhead would ever notice. The world above continues, but it does not lead here. Around you, eyes gather what little they can, large, patient, open to the dim. Elsewhere, vision gives way to other kinds of knowing. Pressure, motion, the passing trace of food, the difference between one thin layer of water and the next. In the twilight zone, certainty is never abundant. That is why movement feels careful here. Nothing rushes without cause. Swimming has a cost, and so many lives in this depth seem shaped by the quiet mathematics of what can be spent and what must be saved. Economy becomes a kind of grace. You drift past a body all mouth and softness, loose in structure, held less by firmness than by the water itself. In brighter places, such a design might seem unfinished, but here it belongs completely, as though form has accepted suspension as its first condition. The ocean is carrying more than it seems. Elsewhere, another creature barely moves at all. It waits for what comes down. A patient feeder in a world where meals may arrive as fragments, as chance, as drift. That waiting changes the meaning of hunger until it becomes less an emergency than an atmosphere. Need settles into rhythm. You remain only awareness. No lungs, no limbs, no warm boundary between you and the sea. The cold is steady, not sharp, not cruel, only constant, as if the water has chosen one quiet temperature and kept it for ages, allowing life to shape itself around reliability rather than comfort. There is peace in that. Pressure is here too, not as pain, only as a vast surrounding fact, the weight of the ocean arranging what can endure within it. And yet, this immense force does not feel violent from within the drift. It feels complete. A few lights pulse at a distance, then stop. Then farther off, another brief reply. The darkness has its own conversation, not loud, not even continuous. Just small declarations and withdrawals, signals that might warn, confuse, attract, disguise, or simply pass through the black water and be lost in it. Meaning flickers, then settles. Below the faint ceiling of blue, some bodies carry their own answer to being seen from underneath. A careful matching of the dim glow above. Light used not to appear, but to disappear. In other words, even brightness here can become camouflage, That reversal feels true to the whole place. So much in this layer works by subtle correction. Reflect what little remains. Erase the outline. Hold still when stillness helps. Rise only when the world above has darkened enough to make the journey worth its cost. And somewhere, all around you, though not all at once, the great commute is underway, or has just passed, or is slowly preparing to begin again. Not a stampede, not a single direction, more like a breathing of the ocean, an unseen tide of hunger and caution traveling up and down through dimness every day. The scale of it is quiet. If you drift upward a little, more bodies gather. If you settle lower, they thin. The gradient is soft, but everything responds to it. A slight change in light becomes a map, and countless lives read that map without needing language, without needing certainty, without ever seeing the whole pattern they belong to. Still, they move with it. That is what this place keeps offering. Not sharp borders, not final arrivals, only transitions so gradual they could be mistaken for stillness, until some change in color, temperature, movement, or company reveals that you have been crossing a threshold all along. The ocean prefers gradients. A shape with delicate appendages opens to the drift. Something small passes into it. Elsewhere, a wider mouth takes what chance provides. Elsewhere still, a hunter hangs almost motionless, spending so little that the waiting itself becomes its method. Here, effort is measured carefully against reward. There is no waste in that, no feeling of lack. Only adaptation so settled into the conditions around it that scarcity no longer seems like an interruption. It is simply part of the design, one of the quiet rules from which elegance has been made. Life can become very precise when little is available. You move through falling carbon without naming it, a snowfall from worlds above, a slow transfer of surface life into depth, where each drifting scrap joins a larger exchange the planet depends on and never notices. Even here, hidden things are helping hold the whole Earth in balance. Yet nothing announces this importance. The particles do not glow with significance. The animals moving among them are not grand in the way humans usually mean. The work is real anyway, done in darkness, by softness and appetite and gravity, by countless small passages that together shape a world. Quiet processes can be planetary. The farther you drift, the less any single creature seems to stand alone. A glimmer matters because of the dark around it. A migration matters because of the light above it and the depth below. A drifting meal matters because someone, somewhere, has waited long enough for it to arrive. Everything here belongs to relation. That feeling deepens. The Twilight Zone is not one thing. It is a conversation between downward and upward, between being seen and not seen, between spending energy and saving it, between the memory of day and the approach of night. To live here is to live in negotiation. And you, having no body, take part only by witnessing. You pass near a lantern glow so faint it could almost be imagined. You linger in water where nothing visible moves for several long moments. Then, a shape, soft and distant, turns just enough to catch the last of the blue above and disappears again. The world remains mostly hidden. That hiddenness does not feel secretive now. It feels restful. There is no demand that everything reveal itself. No creature is asked to be more knowable than its own life requires. The unknown is allowed to stay unknown, and the water grows gentler for that permission. Some truths are more comfortable at the edge of sight. The blue above is dimmer now, not gone, only reduced to a thin suggestion. What was once a field of color has become a distant wash, and soon even that will seem less like light than like memory still lingering in the water. Day loosens its grip slowly. In that loosening, the inhabitants change almost imperceptibly. Some rise, some hold, some settle lower. A body that was silver becomes dark from this angle. A body that was visible becomes line, then blur, then nothing at all. The ecosystem rearranges itself by degrees. No one gives a signal. No bell marks the hour. The timing lives in the water itself, in the amount of light left, in the pressure of hunger, in the old calculations written into muscle and nerve and luminous skin. The ocean keeps time without clocks. You drift through a region of greater quiet. Fewer flashes now, more distance between them. The marine snow continues its patient descent, and the creatures that remain near you seem less intent on travel than on simply being held where they are, suspended in a dark that asks very little except fit. Here, belonging looks like buoyancy. What makes this calm so deep is that nothing needs to resolve. The twilight does not have to become full night at once. The blue does not have to surrender suddenly. The animals do not rush to finish their lives before darkness arrives. Everything is already adjusted to incompletion. The in-between is home. That may be why this layer feels so ancient. Not because it is unchanged, it is always changing, but because its changes happen within a patient pattern. Light thinning, bodies rising and falling, matter settling, hunger waiting, signals flickering, the planet breathing through processes too slow for urgency. Age can sound like steadiness. You continue downward only a little, or perhaps the water around you simply grows darker while you remain where you are. The distinction matters less now. Orientation softens in open water, and without a body, there is no need to insist on direction. There is only more or less light. The last clear glimmers become sparse. Each one seems farther away. A faint constellation made not of stars, but of lives keeping their own counsel in the pressure and cold. Then even those begin to space themselves so widely that darkness becomes the truer presence. It settles around every interval. The animals seem quieter now, not absent, only less expressive to your passing awareness. A feeder remains open in the drift. A hunter waits with ancient patience. A near-invisible body hangs in the dim water as if sketched there and left unfinished. Nothing appears lonely. The water itself becomes the main event. Cold, dense, still moving, but with such broad and gentle motion that stillness is the better word. You are carried through a place that does not need to perform its vastness because it is vast in every direction already. The scale has gone soft. There is almost no blue now, only dark layered upon dark. Yet the world has not ended. It has merely lowered its voice until even wonder feels less like a thought and more like a condition the water has placed around everything living here. A hush can also be an ecosystem. You drift among the last visible particles. One falls past, then another, then a long pause. Something faint opens and closes far off. Then nothing answers. Or perhaps the answer is too small, too distant, too well hidden for you to notice. The Twilight Zone has never depended on being fully witnessed in order to continue being itself. It continues. So you remain with it. No effort, no search, only attention, loosening. Around you, movement slows again. The upward travelers have mostly passed beyond this depth or have not yet begun. Those that stay seem content with still water and low light, with suspension, with intervals, with the quiet arithmetic of survival worked out long ago and repeated tonight without drama. The pattern holds. Everything has grown still. The world continues in the dark, patient and ancient, as it always has. The listener rests with it. From here, there is nothing left to follow. Only the quiet fact that this hidden world has been here all along. Beneath the bright weather of human life, the Twilight Zone continues. It continues without witness, in dim blue water where sunlight thins into memory, where bodies rise and sink in ancient rhythm, and where the falling remains of the surface world are received, altered, and carried onward into the vast dark below. It continues. That may be one of the gentlest wonders of the ocean. So much depends on places we rarely see. A middle layer, cold and patient, helps steady the breathing balance of the planet not by drama, but by persistence. In other words, one of Earth's great hidden labors is done in near darkness, by drifting particles and quiet migrations and lives that ask for almost nothing except the conditions to go on. Quietly. And the lives there do go on. Countless forms, half seen and soft, move through that dimness with strategies shaped by scarcity, light, pressure, and time. What makes this so moving is not only that they survive there, but that they belong there so completely that the place and its creatures seem to explain one another. They are not visitors to the in-between. They are its true residents. They fit. That fit matters. We spend so much of thought dividing the world into clear opposites, light and dark, surface and depth, known and unknown. Yet the Twilight Zone has been reminding us all night that life is often most itself in the gradient, in the slow fading between one certainty and another, in the realm where edges soften and strict categories begin to drift apart. It is a quiet correction, a patient one. There is comfort in that. Not everything meaningful has to stand in full light. Not everything influential has to be easily seen. Some of the world's most important work is done in places that remain dim, distant, and largely hidden, and that does not make them lesser. It gives them a different kind of presence, a deeper one. By now, even the idea of this layer may feel less like information and more like atmosphere, a band of water, a fading of sun, the slow commute of uncountable bodies, carbon settling through the sea like a long thought finishing itself. Strange animals built not for extremes, but for the middle condition between them. The farther one rests with these things, the more the Twilight Zone begins to feel not empty, but quietly full, full enough. And perhaps that is what lingers. Not any single creature, not any single process, just the sense that the planet is made not only of continents and weather and daylight, but also of hidden continuities beneath them, places where the work of living carries on with no announcement, no applause, and no need to be noticed in order to matter. It matters anyway. Let your jaw unclench a little more now. Let the tongue rest low and easy. Let the hands remain open, with nothing to hold and nothing required of them. Let the weight of your body settle fully, as if gravity has become kinder, softer, more willing to carry what you no longer need to carry yourself. Your eyes are heavy. They do not need to search. They do not need to make sense of anything more tonight. There is nowhere to be except here, at the quiet edge of sleep, while far beneath storms and coastlines and ships and cities, the middle ocean keeps its own slow company in the dark. It keeps going. That is why this can feel so calming. The world is larger than our attention, and steadier too. While thought loosens and the day recedes, immense, gentle systems continue beneath it all, patient and untroubled by whether anyone is awake to consider them. The migrations still rise and fall. The carbon still drifts downward. The hidden lives still glide through blue, becoming black. They continue. You do not need to follow them anymore. You can let the images thin, let the water darken, let the scale of it all become soft around the edges, until what remains is only a feeling of depth, of distance, of something vast and quiet holding its form without effort. Let that be enough. There is nothing to solve here, only a dim layer beneath the sun and beneath our thoughts, where life has found ways to endure in softness, in patience, in almost dark. Only a reminder that the earth does not stop where our seeing stops. It continues gently beyond us. It always has. And now the mind can do the same. It can loosen its grip. It can drift from one thought to the next without needing to keep them. It can settle like marine snow through dark water, slowly, naturally, with no sound at all. The body can be heavy now. The hands can rest. The face can soften. Nothing is being asked of you. Only rest. Good night.